Hello, thank you for joining me today. We are going to talk about what happened in the South Bay of Los Angeles in 2023 in terms of the real estate housing market. So, specifically, our area here in the South Bay. I'm Garrison Comstock with Garrison Team Real Estate, and let's get into it now. With no further ado, this is what happened in the South Bay Los Angeles Real Estate 2023, presented by Garrison Team Real Estate. So the interesting thing to start with is to start with what the forecasts were, because this will be important moving forward now going into 2024. So the forecasts last year at the beginning of the year in 2023 were some positive in terms of home price appreciation and some negative in terms of home price appreciation. And as we discovered over the first couple months of the year, these forecasts started to change. Right. And these are reputable companies, Realtor.com, NAR, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae. These forecasts by the end of the year all did change. So if you look at this here, the 2023 year-end home price forecast, now these were in December of this year. So we went from some positive, some negative to mostly folks reporting that home prices did increase and we're on the positive end of the spectrum. So what I hope to show you here is that nobody really knows when they're coming to predict things for the year, because the only thing constant in life is change. So you can see that folks were all over the place coming into the year, and then home prices generally appreciated from January to December. And therefore, at the end of the year, everybody's like, oh, wait, they appreciated. And let's get into what actually happened this year in the numbers, because we'll come back to this as well, as it's important moving forward because we do have expectations for 2024. So as you can see here, I did a bunch of 5-year graphs that I'm about to show you. And in 2019 and 2023, you can see the stark difference in terms of new listings. And you can also see it in closed listings. So if you take a look at the different months of new listings here, in January of 2019, we had 537 to January of 2023, 317, and on, 578 to 308, 678 to 340. So you can see fairly easily from these numbers in general here in the South Bay new listings that we had a decreased amount of listings in 2023. You can see that also in closed sales. 288, 280, 436, 460. We had 1 month in the 400s in 2023 versus 2019, which was the last normal market we had. I should say that the reason I'm comparing it to 2019 is because 2019 was the last year of a normal market. Once 2020 hit, and you'll see this in the graphs coming up in a few minutes, once 2020 hit, we went into a completely separate market. So it's important to look at like the pre-2020, what was happening in a normal market, the 2020 to 2022, 2020 to 2022, and then 2022 second half and on, because 3 different markets. So you can see that here in this graph. This is the closed sales graph here. And you can see that every year we have closed sales increase in about March, April, May, June of each year, and then decrease towards the end of the year. It happened in 2018, in 2019, in 2020, except 2020, it stays low there because 2020, what happened in March of 2020 was COVID, right? So we did not have many closed sales in the beginning of the year. And then as soon as we went back to selling homes, it spiked and went back to its normal level. And you can see that we're kind of hitting this mark above 1,600 closed sales, around 1,600 closed sales, and then above 1,600 closed sales every year. You can see we're hitting that. We hit it in 2018, 2019, 2020, and that's in more August. We were shifted back a few months, 2021. But then as soon as 2022 comes, we don't hit those highs. And then you can really see in this graph in 2023 how just the whole year we barely had any inventory. We had barely any closed sales. And the reason for that is not because homes necessarily weren't selling, because here's the new listings graph. And you can see that almost every year we hit 2,200 new listings at a certain time of the month, a certain time of the year. 2018, we hit almost 2,200. 2019, we hit almost 2,200. 2020, we were a little bit down at the peak, but still over 2,000. 2021, same thing. 2022, we were lowered. We never reached those heights. And we'll talk about why that happened. And then in 2023, you can see we never even got close. We were at 1,400 was our max amount of new listings in a month. So we had very, very, very little inventory almost the entirety of 2023. So this is what happened to average sale price. So you can see the average sale price went down the second half of 2022 in the South Bay, and then immediately rose back up in 2023 and then stayed relatively stable. Once again, we're looking at this in three different markets, right? The 2018 to 2020 market was one market. That is a normal real estate market, which is historically 3 to 5% appreciation every year. We were probably a little bit more than that, but you can see that with that line there. I did that red line kind of through the middle of that section to show just a little bit of appreciation. And then COVID hits, 2020 hits, and the Fed reduces interest rates to the lowest levels we've seen in the history of the United States. We set 16 new low records in 2020 and 2021, and home prices skyrocketed. Skyrocketed from about March 2020 all the way till about May 2022. And then what happens is interest rates start to rise, and they start to rise every 3 weeks, about 2 or 3 times a month. They're rising a half a point until they get all the way up over 7%. And that stunts the market for about 6 months, the second half of the year, as sellers don't want to put their home on the market because they don't want to sell their 3% that they refinanced to the previous 2 years and then buy at a 7%. And also buyers decide that they would only like to buy the perfect property. If a buyer is going to spend all of their money, their hard-earned money on an expensive property, they want it to perfectly fit their needs. And that's the general sentiment. That's what happened the second half of 2022. Then we got into 2023 and rates stayed at 7%. That's the important thing to notice here. Rates did not come down in 2023. They stayed at 7.5 the entirety of the year, yet prices rebounded right back to where they were in the middle of 2022, and then stayed relatively similar. You can see that we had that little dip at the end of the year, but you can see on all of these graphs in terms of sale prices, we have a little dip at the end of every year. It's kind of normal. The dip at the end of 2022 was the interest rate generated dip, and you can see that we did not go down as much in 2023. It's more of just an end of the year thing. We would expect the next month, January, February, March, to come for prices to the trend, right? You can see this happening every year. 2018, little increase, 2019 increase, 2020 increase, 2021 increase, 2022 increase, 2023 increase. You can see it every year. January, February, March, April, May, home prices tend to rise. So we expect to see that again this year. But it's interesting to note, see the 3 different markets. Now, my red line goes a little bit depreciation wise from the middle of 2022 to 2023. If you draw it, obviously, from the start of 2023 to the end of 2023, it's solid appreciation. And we see that here in the South Bay because we started relatively lower. But in general, we've been pretty steady since the peak. We're right around what the peak values were in the middle of 2022. And that's kind of where we find prices today, where we kind of went down and up in between. So if you were out there and you were trying to time the market and get properties when they're at their lowest values, that was it. It was the second half of 2022. It was December 2022, January 2023, that area, because now we're back up above that. And we'll move on to what we expect moving forward here at the end of this presentation. You can see this again in the South Bay average percentage of original price. This is the sold price as a percentage of the original list price. 2018, 2019, 2020, where we have a normal market, there's equal amounts of buyers and sellers, right? That's what a normal market is. and there's a little bit of negotiation room. You list, and in certain parts, sometimes it was 100%, but mostly it was around 98%-ish of list price. And that's where there would be a little bit of negotiation room on most properties. Some would sell over, some would sell under, and then they'd average out about 98%. Then March 2020 hits, and we're well over, right? We're 102%, we're 104%, we're 106% at one point, which means a lot of properties are selling well over. That is a function, and talk to your realtor about this. That's a function also of the listing price strategy. When we as agents are in the market and we know that we're going to get 10, 12, 14, 16 offers because there's so much demand on properties, we know it's okay to list lower to get everybody in to drive up the price later. And that's what many of us were doing. So a part of the reason it averaged out at 106 is because sometimes we had homes, as you've heard, go $100,000 over list price or $200,000 over list price. But sometimes those were priced lower than they were expected to sell on purpose. I might have $1 million listing and price it at $929, knowing that I'm going to get 15 offers. I'm going to sell it over $1 million, right? So just know that. But you can see it as this is better as a function of where negotiations are, right? So in 2023, negotiations drove right back up to 100%, and they're staying right in that normal market-ish, where there's a little bit of negotiation on certain properties and not so much on others in a normal market, right? Just like you can see it here, we had generally 2018 to 2020 normal market, and then boom, very rapid market in 2020 to 2022. And then we're back in a normal market now. That's kind of where we sit. So moving on. So why with interest rates at 7 did we continue to see prices go up? Why did we see real estate bounce back so heavily in January or February of last year after they had declined for 6 months? And the reason is demand. There was a limited supply, because there's always going to be a limited supply in a high interest rate environment, especially coming off an environment with the lowest interest rates in the history of the United States. Because if you own a home at a 3.5% interest rate, and you know if you sell your home to buy your next one, not only are you most likely buying a more expensive home, but if you're going to buy your next home at 7.5%, that's a large jump. So what it's done is it has kept folks from selling. It has kept inventory low. And where's the demand? Well, the demand is so high already that even if demand was decreased because of the low inventory market, there's still so many people looking to buy that there was more buyers than sellers. And you can see that here. This is why. This is Census Bureau data, U.S. population by age and generation. And we've heard for a long time that the baby boomers were the largest generation ever, and the millennials are even bigger than them, right? We've heard that before. This is a good way to visualize it, because as you can see, I put a dotted line across the top and tried to make it as even as possible, as level as possible across the largest year of baby boomers. So the largest amounts of folks born in a baby boomer year, and drew it across. And you can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years of millennials that have significantly more people than the largest year of the baby boomers. So this also comes into play when you hear things like, what happens when the baby boomers sell their houses? Well, one, I would say the baby boomers are giving their houses to their kids and they're buying more houses for the most part. But number two, we have so many millennials that will just eat up all that inventory. And you can see that really well on this graph. So first-time home buyers are 50% of the real estate market. And the average age of a first-time home buyer historically is 33 years old. So that's how I did this chart. We'll talk about 36 years old later, because that makes things scary. So 33 years old in 2020, when all of this started, like the year when the Fed cut rates so hard that we had the lowest interest rates in the history of the United States, and everybody was telling you, buy now, buy now. If you could throw a rock, you could hit a buyer, because everybody should have bought then. because money was so cheap. If you can get a 3% interest rate, like imagine that today, you'd be super happy, right? So in the moment, right when that 33 years old in 2020 hit, as we've had 1, 2, 3, 4 years of the most amount of people in the history of the United States turning buying age, it became the cheapest it was ever in the history of the United States to buy a home. And those numbers were won by interest rates wise, right? Money was the cheapest, but also in terms of median income and median home price, it was the most affordable it had ever been to buy a home. So that's why the market skyrocketed, because we had the most potential buyers historically in the market. And then the largest percentage of those buyers were able to buy a home historically because of affordability and interest rates. So fast forward a couple of years and you can see where the line is for 33 years old this year this past year in 2023. It's still increasing. We still set a record in 2023 for the most individuals turning buying age in the United States in the history of the United States. And we're going to set a record this year in 2024. So the mass amounts of potential buyers getting to the age where they want to buy a home has trumped the high interest rates and the low inventory. The inventory is so low that there's still more buyers than sellers. Even if 10% of these buyers were able to purchase a house at 7.5% interest rates, that is still an extremely large pool of buyers. So now if we want to talk about the 2022 data, where the average age of a first-time home buyer was 36 years old, then that means these lines are shifted back 3 years. And we even have more years to go of large amounts of potential home buyers turning buying age. So moving forward, this is both exciting and scary. It's exciting because it means that no matter what happens with interest rates, and legitimately, we just saw it in 2023, where interest rates were at 7.5, the highest level they had been in 20 years. Even though they weren't as high as they were in the early 90s or the 80s, they were still significantly higher right after a market where they're the lowest they'd ever been. And home prices still appreciated from January to December because we still had more buyers than sellers. So if interest rates stay high, you can probably expect more of the same, because these numbers of buyers every year is getting larger. Also, remember, the past year and a half or 2 years now, we have a pent-up demand of buyers that turned 33 that didn't buy because interest rates are too high and they couldn't afford it. So if interest rates do come down, not only are we having everybody who turns 33 this year willing and able to buy, then we've got the folks that turned 33 last year and the year before when interest rates were high that couldn't afford it at that point will re-enter the market. Everybody who's waited will re-enter the market. So it'll be like a multiplier effect in terms of demand. Now, supply will rise as well. But we saw that in 2020 and 2021, that with this level of demand, the supply won't be high enough. Because even so, many of those suppliers coming to the market are second home buyers. They're moving from one property to another. Like they're deciding to sell their first home and then buy another one because interest rates went down, which means they're also a buyer entering the market. It's 1-to-1 on both sides of the equation. So what to expect in 2024? If interest rates stay the same, I would say more of the same. Small growth, normal market. But I want you to remember where I started here with home price forecasts at the beginning of the year from very reputable sources, and how many of them were wrong and changed what they thought by the end of the year. Because in reality, we don't know what the Fed is going to do. We don't know what's going to happen with interest rates. We do know that this demand is there. And that's why this is very important to me and why I try to spend a lot of time on this graph, because this demand isn't going anywhere. It's sure portions of these potential buyers will increase or decrease depending on interest rates, but it will always remain the largest group of individuals that are potentially buying their first house in the history of the United States. So the Fed in December held rates steady, and the Fed said, and by the way, Jerome Powell said that they expect to decrease rates in 2024. Now, we don't know how much they're going to decrease rates. We don't know if they eventually will, because in 2017 to 2019, I heard plenty of times that they were going to increase rates and we were going to see price drops, and it never happened. And then in 2020 to 2023, I heard a bunch of times they were going to do things with rates. It didn't happen. And then in 2022, they finally rose them out of nowhere. So what the Fed eventually does is what will affect the market. And they expect to lower rates. However, we'll see if they actually do it. But that's the news that we should work off of. But I would caution you that every time a bit of news drops out of the Fed, you're going to see tons of clickbaity headlines that will say one thing or another. And just remember, what the Fed says and what the Fed does is what matters. And even all of these reputable companies at the beginning of last year had totally different takes on what was going to go on with the market. The same thing happens with all of these clickbaity takes. I say, beware the clickbait headlines. As you can see, as you know, I've toured, thousands of properties in my lifetime. I've been a real estate broker here in the South Bay for over 10 years. So I've toured thousands of properties. And I've also talked about interest rates in the market and what's going to happen with them thousands of times. Every time an article comes out with a really, really great clickbaity title, somebody sends it to me and asks me what my thoughts are, right? So I'm always looking at them and talking about them. And so some folks sent me this the other day, some clients. And this is an example of what one website will come up with over a matter of a couple days. So first, the Fed will cut rates under 3% as a mild recession leads to soggy 2024. That's an interesting title. And the Fed will cut interest rates below by 3% by next December. So I will caution you to this. This is one man's opinion. Just like this whole video that you're watching right now is one man's opinion. It's my opinion. It's why I'm telling you where I'm getting the information. But this is one man's opinion of what's going to happen next year. And I caution you to believe that one opinion because, as I showed you in the beginning, you ask a different economist, they'll have a different outlook, right? But this is the same internet company, Business Insider, that also said Fed will cut interest rates 6 times in 2024 as economy slows. This is an IMG economist. And then 4 hours ago, Fed not cutting anytime soon, Macquarie says. It's another ING banking economist. These companies have a obligation to create articles that will get people to click on them every day, 24 hours a day, because we have a 24-hour news cycle. So what they say at one moment, they might not say the next moment, and what one guy's opinion will be might not be the next guy's opinion. And the next day, there might be another guy who says the exact opposite. And then boom, they have another article. So just remember, what matters is what the Fed says and what the Fed does. And that's Chair Jerome Powell. They said they expect to lower rates, but they did not say by how much. And that also does not mean they're going to do it. They expect to do it because, as you see here, in this is a snippet from the article, inflation is low, and that's why they expect to lower things. And by the way, inflation is the enemy of interest rates. So in general, if you want to track this without even listening to the Fed, if you expect inflation to continue to stay high, interest rates will remain high. If you expect inflation to decrease, interest rates will decrease. Generally speaking, those move together. So inflation is down. Therefore, the Fed's like, cool, we don't need to artificially keep interest rates high anymore. That's what they said. That's what they plan to do. However, if inflation crops up its ugly head in February, this will all change. So just remember that. And remember, just beware. Always read it. Always know if you're reading one person's opinion or you're reading what the Fed actually said, because there's a big difference between those two. And this video is one person's opinion as well. So what to expect in terms of my opinion, if interest rates remain high, more of the same, steady growth, not much inventory, 3 to 5% appreciation year over year. Properties that are priced right will sell quickly. Properties that are overpriced will sit. All the stats I showed you about 2023, very similar. If interest rates decrease, then all of these people in yellow are going to come back to the market, the ones that were not in the last year and a half because of high interest rates. There will be more inventory to buy from, but there will be a significantly larger amount of buyers returning than inventory hitting the market. And we'll see a market once again like we saw 2020 to the middle of 2022 if interest rates come down. Because that demand is there, it's sitting there, it always will be there, and will continue to be there because we continue to have these large amounts of people that are turning buying age. So if that demand gets a scent of properties that they can afford more, they might go after it. If you are looking to purchase a property, given what I see with what the Fed said, where they expect to lower interest rates, then I would urge you to buy sooner than later, because if you buy at a higher interest rate, which right now is about 6.5%, and 6 months from now, that interest rate's at a 5%, you already have the property and you can refinance at that point and lower your rate to a 5%. So you only had 6 months at that 6.5% rate. So you paid a premium of, a couple $100 a month for 6 months to have your home first. Whereas in that 6 months, your property value in this scenario where interest rates lowered would appreciate 20, 40, 50,000, depending on what type of property you're buying. So it's better to get in earlier, lock in your low price, lock in your low property tax, and then refinance at the lower rate later than it is to wait for that lower rate and save the couple $1,000s in order to buy a home that's 20, 30, 40, $50,000 more later with tons and tons of competition. If you're a seller in this market, there are multiple ways to get at this. And what we do is we do a portfolio consultation where we talk about your property and what you plan to do with it, whether you plan to rent it or sell it, and what the best time monetarily and convenience wise would be for you to sell and buy, or buy and sell, or try to do both at the same time, and what your expectations would be in terms of your net profits. But also lifestyle and convenience is big as well. So everybody's different. You are different. So there's plenty of ways to do things, and we go over all of those so you can choose the best for you. Thanks again for watching our What Happened in the South Bay, Los Angeles Real Estate Update in 2023. Hope you enjoyed that and found that informative. If you did, please like and subscribe on this channel. We'll try to have more informative videos come out, both about the areas and about the market, hopefully to educate you to make better decisions coming up here in 2024, because it's going to be a fantastic year. I hope to see all of you in it sometime. I'm happy to be your real estate guide, so reach out and I'll talk to you soon.